Good afternoon. Corky Alexander here in Hamilton, Alabama, talking about spiritual geography. This is a topic within the mountain spirituality talks I'm giving. First of all, the biblical basis for spiritual geography. There was a reference in the Old Testament where God said that Cain's brother Abel's blood cries out from the ground. This is a reference to residual effects of violence and genocide, and we know that in the areas of the world where there's been so much more atrocities committed, that there are effects. And people that live on that land don't know what kind of problems they have that are caused by a historical type of trauma in an area. Beyond, and there would be many other references in the Old Testament that indicate, the idea of a residual evil in the geography of a location. We have epistles in the New Testament written by Paul that are referred to as prison epistles. And this is more than just a passing location. This means that we need to pay attention when we read the prison epistles for what remarks Paul might make based upon him writing in a prison. Because when you would write in a prison, you would write differently than you would write if you were out in the free world. One possible example of this would be his description of the Roman suit of armor and the fact that he might have been looking at a guard in the prison when he wrote that. But anyway, soldiers' uniforms and law enforcement officers' appearances would have an effect on writing for someone that was nearby. Also in the Bible, we have the references to the wilderness. Jesus went into the wilderness to be tempted and to get alone. John the Baptist ministry based out of the wilderness, and wilderness here is not a forest like we refer to in modern language, but wilderness would be a desert. And the desert is one of those places that is very, very, very often referred to in church history as a particular geography that impacts spirituality and thoughts and ideas. We know from spending time with indigenous people that they have a spiritual awareness of the earth and of geology, whereas non-native people, Euro-Americans and so forth, tend to view the earth as a resource to be exploited or to be used or to be possessed. Hence the whole idea of real estate sales. Indigenous people would ask the question, how far into the earth do you own? If you own 5 acres, do you own it 12 feet under the earth? Do you own beyond that? Do you own that land all the way to the core of the earth? It's a good question, and Europeans don't have a struggle with that idea, but indigenous people do struggle with that concept, that the earth is, Mother Earth. And we're not talking here in terms of New Age. We're talking in terms of indigenous people worldwide and their belief systems and their worldview at the time that Europeans invaded and colonized, and of course still the indigenous idea today. One interesting thing, when I was teaching a course in Oklahoma on uh, Native American counseling, which was in a degree program that I was working with there in Oklahoma, was the fact that the Native indigenous students that were in my class all made reference to alcohol being a spirit. And of course, white people tend to view alcohol as just, simple chemistry. Um, but they view alcohol as a spirit. Obviously, it's referred to as spirits in the stores. But indigenous people have a belief that alcohol is a spirit, and the reason they believe this is because that fermentation is a natural process in the earth, and they believe the earth is spiritual. Therefore, that process is a spiritual process. So that when indigenous people talk about getting over alcoholism and so forth, then they're going to want to speak personally to the spirit. There's going to be some type of relationship there that needs to be broken or transformed. So these are the kind of ideas that set forth, the idea of spiritual geography, that places on the earth are spiritual. And when we come to the church fathers after the New Testament, we hear references to desert fathers. There's a whole category of church fathers who write. They're referred to as desert fathers because they did their spiritual work and their writing in the concept of the desert. They would naturally make references to Moses because Moses spent quite a bit of time in Egypt, and there's much more of Egypt in Exodus and among the Israeli people there than what we would give attention to or what we would believe, because Christianity's been so contextualized within our cultures that we sometimes fail to peel the onion, and there's quite a bit of Egypt and the context of Egypt in Exodus, well, the entire Pentateuch for that matter. When we come to contemporary times, there's also discussions of spiritual geography. Kathleen Norris wrote a book called Dakota. I highly recommend this book. It was a book that was brought to my attention when I was located in South Dakota. And South Dakota is very significant in the northern plains because of the geography and what meanings that holds for indigenous people as well as non-native people. Kathleen Norris said, the geography that we live on, we inhabit it and it inhabits us. And she makes reference in there to a condition which I think that I probably suffered from when I was living out there. And it's a form of seasickness that an individual gets living in the Great Plains. The fields of wheat and whatever tend to blow in the wind like waves of the ocean. And you have these two extremes. You either have mountains or you have flat plains. And this context, this geography, has a psychological effect on us. And I did experience that myself. We know that in South Dakota, Bear Butte, which I made mention of in the last talk, is probably the number one most sacred place for indigenous people worldwide, so that there are medicine men and healers and people like that come up from South America even to visit Bear Butte. People from Ecuador have been there. And so if we talk about sacred places in terms of geography, in South Dakota, it'd be Bear Butte be number one. Number two would be in Wyoming, which is Devil's Tower. It's a Kiowa location, but it's revered and visited. Pilgrimages are carried out there by people all the time. The third one would be Pipestone, Minnesota. All of this in a very close relationship to the Black Hills. And I had significant experience at Pipestone, similar to the experience I had at Bear Butte. And so these places, we understand about pilgrimages to the Holy Land. We understand about going out into nature and about nature's presence of God that it holds. But we need to be thinking more in terms of these spiritual locations worldwide, because prayer mountains are something that exists not only in the United States, but in South America. There are Inca locations. They have them in Africa. They have them in Korea. Many people are familiar with Paul Young-Cho's prayer mountain. They are also, these mountains are also in other places of the world, and they can be visited, and people do go there. Like if you ever go to Clingman's Dome in North Carolina, or Bear Butte in South Dakota, or Devil's Tower in Wyoming, for these examples, you might see colored ribbons tied in the trees, and this is prayer ties, prayer requests by indigenous people, and they've done ceremonies and they put these ribbons in the trees. And then of course when you go to Mount Everest, if you go there, I've never been, but I've seen a lot of video of it, the Sherpa people have those as well. They're prayer flags, and there are all types of monasteries in those areas of the Andes, and and that would be the Himalayas, I think, or wherever. But the idea is that prayer mountains are to be visited, and this is true for not just indigenous religious practices, but also for Christian practices. So that's some of the thoughts about spiritual geography. We probably accept this in terms of World War II and the Nazi war prisons. We probably would acknowledge spiritual power that resides in those places, not to be sought after, but as a residual effect of genocide, so forth like that. But the idea of going to a mountain, making an altar there and praying to God, it's all through the Bible, it's all through church history, and it goes on every day in the contemporary world. And I would like to see the church worldwide to begin to emphasize this. It's one of the few practices that are biblical that are not emphasized in a literal way. There you have spiritual geography. Have a good day.